Actually, this would be good to show. I think I was literally in a hotel room in Tokyo after this initial meeting, and then I had the idea for Rachel. It was literally just based off a picture of Rachel. From that image came the idea of her theme, which is just, you know, there's a certain elegance to the harp, and then they start sort of delving into madness together. My name is Kevin Penkin. I'm a composer. I'm currently here in Melbourne, Australia, hunkering down just like everybody else. What I'm currently working on is a secret. However, the projects that are currently airing are Tower of God, which I'm really happy about. Been waiting for this project to drop for a while, and for it to finally be here is almost surreal, but I'm very happy. My first anime was an anime called Norn 9. That was back in 2016. At the same time, there was an anime OVA called Under the Dog, which I did some music for as well. They came out in the same year, and both of those projects were by a company called Kinema Citrus. Because of those projects with that company, they ended up doing Made in Abyss, which sort of was like the first sort of big foray into anime music for me. I did Shield Hero as well. That was awesome. That was a lot of fun. That was the first anime I did after Made in Abyss, and it was quite a big aesthetic switch up, which was really refreshing. So yeah, Shield Hero was a lot of fun to write for. So I was actually born in the UK, but like when I was 5 or 6, I moved to Australia, and I grew up there in Perth, and so I consider myself very much Australian, but if I need to, you know, go to the UK, I obviously enter as a British citizen. Well, I started out with video games actually. So I was super lucky when I was it would have been like the end of high school, start of college, sort of undergrad, and I went to a Distant Worlds Final Fantasy concert and got to meet the composer, Nobuo Uematsu. I managed to meet him, I met his manager, and because Australia is somewhat close, I was able to go to Japan a couple of times over a couple of years, and I would be very lucky to meet up with them and just say hello casually. All these times I was sort of meeting up, I'd be like, this is what I've been working on as a student for the last 12 months or something like that. And eventually Uematsu-san's manager very kindly asked, look, we have this Japanese game, and Uematsu's going to write the theme, and would you like to write some background music for this game as well? And I was like, yeah, of course, this is insane, this is so cool. But through that initial 1 or 2 games that I did with Uematsu in that capacity, main theme, background music, one of those games was actually Norn 9, which then turned out to be an anime later on. So that was like the first connection. Yeah, I've been doing some, I'm still working with some Japanese companies, which are awesome. And then the other big passion of mine is Australian indie games, or just indie games in general, but like being able to work on some Australian games, it's very gratifying, because part of the reason I wanted to move home was because I was kind of a bit homesick, and I kind of missed the community here. And the community, especially the indie game community here in Melbourne, is one of the best kind of like networks ever, just in terms of like quality of person per capita. It's pretty good. I was actually made aware of Tower of God a while back, and just had to really sit on it, and I did so successfully, I'm happy to say. I was told about it at Crunchyroll Expo actually a couple of years back, and that's where our first meeting happened, sort of. Basically, one of the associate producers came up and said, look, I think you would be perfect for Tower of God based off your Shield Hero and your Made in Abyss work. I think that's like sort of the right approach, or the right starting point for what we're hoping to achieve with Tower of God. And then it just so happened that after Crunchyroll Expo, which happens on the West Coast, I was flying to Japan, and so we had another meeting there, and they gave me some manhwa to read, and we had an initial meeting with the entire team, and that's where things sort of started. It's not finished. There's an entire process which I'll get into in a minute. Finishing a composition is basically like step one of like 6, and so the music was finished last year. We recorded in Prague, which was awesome. Never been to Prague before, but we recorded in the Dvorak Hall, which is like this huge concert hall, and they have this insane. I think it's a SS88 set up in the basement. So it's got this awesome control studio, just a shit ton of mics, and amazing players. The players were just insane. Well, every project is super different in terms of instrumentation. That's just a personal decision by myself, because I tend to like different ensembles for different projects. I think this gives it a different aesthetic. In this case, there was heavy focus on large string ensemble, so I believe it was 8-8-6-5-4. That's so 8 violin 1, 8 violin 2, 6 viola, 5 cello, might have even been 6 cello, and then 4 double bass. And then we focused then on soloists, mostly bassoon, harp, cello, and viola. And I've used cello a lot before, but I haven't worked with a live harpist before, so the idea of harp came quite early, because one, I hadn't used it before, is a new flavor for me. Especially when I started concepting some of the early music for Tower of God, especially Rachel's theme, trying to find certain elements both that worked both with who she is and what she means to Balm, and also how the visual aesthetics of Tower of God are translated from the manhwa into the anime as well. That was a very, very interesting point for me. I'll show you a couple of tracks, but I think one that starts off, I always have code names for tracks. Sometimes you do just call them like track number 5 or track number 8 or whatever, but in this case, because I was doing a lot of concepting away from anything else, I was just writing based off a reaction to the manga. Actually, this would be good to show. I think I was literally in a hotel room in Tokyo after this initial meeting, and then I had the idea for Rachel. It was literally just based off a picture of Rachel, and it's not a particularly remarkable picture of her. She's not doing anything specific, but she's just looking just past where your eye would meet. From that image came the idea of her theme, which is just, there's a certain elegance to the harp. There's something kind of enchanting and interesting about it, and you'll hear later on this bass here is like, okay, now we know that there's more complexity to Rachel's character, which I found really interesting. Again, also trying to make sure that it is in line with this idea of sonic clarification, or making sure that there's some sort of textual definition in every instrument choice. So in this case, you've got these high ambient sort of tones just carrying the harp. You've got the harp, and then you'll hear in a second. So you get the two sides of, Rachel. And then they start sort of delving into madness together. So yeah, a similar process where this is where it's composed first, and then eventually it's sort of spat out into, thankfully this one didn't require any sort of fiddling around, because it was meant to be free time or anything like that. This is to the grid, so it was a lot easier to make a score of it. But eventually it sort of gets recorded live with the harp, a live harp, because it sounds the live harp even. And I must give a quick shout out to the mixing engineer, Matt Templeman. He just absolutely smashed this, because you'll hear, like, you know, I'll obviously do my best inside the sequencer when I'm composing to produce it and make sure it sounds as good as possible. But you really can't go past a good mixing engineer to make things sound really good. I mean, check this out. I love that you can do different audio manipulations. You can manipulate audio in a different way in Cubase, I find, to Logic, and it sort of makes your brain think a different way. So with this track, using samples, it felt a lot more organic. Logic's really good for MIDI, especially for me. I love using MIDI in Logic. That's kind of where I feel its strengths really lie. Cubase, the way that it can blend audio and MIDI is really cool. And so when you get to a track where you want something that sounds very, this sort of pushed the ideas that I've been talking to you about kind of to the extremes, because we have the idea of these Jahad princesses, which are these incredibly powerful warriors. And so those are represented in this case by choir. Then we have sort of the idea of using just a lot of bass, a lot of aggression in sort of bass sense or something like that to show that these princesses are incredibly powerful. And then on top of that, you have to have this sort of still this organic quality that, you know, sort of like how, you know, you have Shinsu in Tower of God, and you want things to kind of flow like water. Trying to get that to work and trying to have all these sort of concepts, but also, you know, again, have it work practically for the scene. Etc, etc. So yeah, it's a very versatile instrument, and it sounds good, if I'm being honest. So I'll just stop it there. But yeah, so that's all in the box, but then when you're submitting to the people in Tokyo, you're breaking these up into the food groups that I was talking about before. So for example, if they wanted no drums, they just wanted the ambient strings. You could even take away the bass. How do I... There we go. So you just give them that layer, and then they could use that sort of sparingly or however they want. You've got a solo vocal layer, and you've got the choirs as well. So they have complete control over how they want to use this. Like even just using the strings. There's something cool about a pitched down open string tuning. Even though this was an incredibly high pressure environment, because we had to do a lot of music, and I had incredibly high standards for this soundtrack for myself and for the team I was bringing on. But I never felt like we were not hitting the mark. It always felt like, you know, this was going to be something that was worth doing and worth listening to, and it was going to be something that we can look back and say we did a bloody good job. I know that I've definitely become a fan of Tower of God through very luckily being able to participate in it as its composer so far, and I really enjoyed writing for it. I mean, I think as a world this is pretty much as appealing as it gets. It's such an interesting world, and it just feels like we're just, it's just the tip of the iceberg right now, and I know there's a lot of things that fans of the webtoon are anticipating to come, and I think the people who are watching the anime will really enjoy that, and it's going to be a hell of a ride moving forward, and I hope people at the time of this interview the 8th episode has just come out, but I hope people enjoy the rest of the season because it's good fun.